I saw my daughter-in-law fling a suitcase into Willow Lake, and the splash sounded like a door slamming on my family. The November wind cut through my coat as ripples raced under the dock lights, geese honking like alarms in the dark. Jessica's jaw was clenched, sunglasses on though the sun was fading, her red nails shaking as if the suitcase had burned her. My coffee went cold in my hand as she whispered, "It needs to disappear," to no one in particular. In that instant, fear tasted metallic on my tongue. I kicked off my loafers and waded in, the water biting like needles up to my knees, jeans heavy, breath short. The suitcase hovered, then sank, a dull glug and a tug toward the murk, metallic scraping against the old ladder. I grabbed the dock pole, hooked the handle, and hauled, my arms shaking, my fingers numb and stubborn. Jessica stared at me, blank then guilty, before taking a step back like I'd set the lake on fire. "Don't," she whispered. But my mother's bone-deep instinct said otherwise. The latches were sandy and stiff, and when I flipped them, a rush of lake water bled out with the smell of damp paper and cheap perfume. Inside wasn't clothing. It was pieces of us. My mother's cameo locket I'd lost last week, our wedding album swollen and gray, Michael's childhood drawings stuck together like pressed leaves. Tucked under a soaked sweater, a passport with a different last name, a wad of cash wrapped in a rubber band, and a tiny pair of knitted booties the size of my palm. My breath faltered, shock and betrayal settling heavier than the suitcase itself. If you're wondering how a quiet Sunday walk around the cul-de-sac turned into me dragging my family's secrets out of a freezing lake, I'm going to tell you everything. From the first missing keepsake to the late-night whispers I pretended not to hear, it all led to this dock. And if you believe the truth has a way of floating back to the surface, hit subscribe to follow stories like mine, because this one is just getting started. My name is Margaret Larson, and I am 66 years old. If you had asked me yesterday what kind of woman I am, I would have said steady, the kind who knows how to keep custard from curdling and tempers even the sharpest grief with a pot of coffee and a slice of banana bread. I have lived most of my life just outside Minneapolis, where winter lays claim to the calendar whether you're ready or not, and where a lake named Willow sits behind our cul-de-sac like a mirror for the sky. I've walked that loop 1,000 times, past the mailbox where the neighborhood kids wait for the bus in their bright hats, past Don Haugen's pine cone wreath that never quite hangs straight, past the dock that creaks soft as a prayer when the wind pushes it. I have always loved that sound. Tonight, it sounded like a warning. Jessica stood at the end of the dock with her sunglasses on, though the light had already gone gray, the way the day turns quiet before the geese commit to the air. When the suitcase splashed, my heart leaped to my throat as if a door had slammed shut inside me. She whispered, "It needs to disappear," and the world felt tilted, like ice that hasn't settled yet. I did what I always do when something goes wrong. I moved. The water was a bite to the bone, and my jeans pulled me down like stubborn hands, but the pole hooked the handle, and I pulled, arm by arm, as if my life depended on it. Maybe it did. When I snapped the latches, water bled out carrying the smell of cheap perfume and damp paper, and there it was, my mother's cameo locket, gold gone dull with lake water, the wedding album swollen as if our joy had gained weight in storage. Michael's crayon suns and stick people glued together in a mess of color. Tucked beneath a sweater I didn't recognize, I found a passport with a last name that wasn't ours, a wad of cash rubber-banded tight, and a tiny pair of knitted booties, robin's egg blue. I stared so hard the dock lights blurred. Something inside me went still, the way the lake does at dawn when the fog is a soft animal at the shoreline. I looked up. Jessica had taken a step back, as if I had set fire to water. She shook her head. "Don't," she said, voice small, but there was steel under it too. "Just leave it." "Whose passport is this?" I asked. I kept my voice low because I know how a raised tone can turn a moment into an argument. I learned that years ago with toddlers and grief and teenagers who were taller than their own patience. She swallowed. "You went through my things." "These are our things," I said, and my fingers trembled around the edge of the album. On the cover, the photograph we had chosen was blurred with damp. A younger me, in a lace dress I sewed myself, Michael's father, Bill, smiling like a man who believed in forever. I had stitched the hem on that dress at the kitchen table the night before the wedding, because the seamstress backed out and we couldn't afford another. I still have the pinpricks on my index finger if you look close, white scars from a needle and worry. Jessica pushed her sunglasses up with one finger, leaving a smudge on them, and I saw her eyes were ringed in red. She is beautiful when she looks tired, which is as unfair as it sounds. High cheekbones she could hang jewelry from, a neat mouth, that glossy hair. The first time I met her, I thought, my goodness, my son is lucky. I see so many young people with faces bent toward screens. She looked up, she looked you in the eyes. Now those eyes slid away from mine. It was a mistake, she said, words measured like steps in high heels. I should go. She turned, and the slap of her boots on the dock planks was faster than my breath. Jessica, I said. The name tasted of Sunday dinners and the lavender lotion she kept in the guest bathroom, of egg bake at Christmas, and the first time she let me take her for coffee at Caribou, when we sat with our cups steaming, and I asked nothing except to hear about her mother, who passed when she was in college. Please don't walk away. You always do this, she said without turning, and her voice had the crisp sheen of ice on a puddle. You think you know best. You think you get to fix it, but it's not yours to fix. She reached the end of the dock and onto the path. I could hear her keys, the jingle familiar and cruel. I stood knee-deep in Willow Lake holding a suitcase of our life, shivering hard enough my teeth clicked. The geese called something that sounded like urgency. I should have called Michael right then. Instead, I gathered the things that could be saved, one by one. The album, heavy and limp, the pages a tender mess. The locket, which I closed my hand around, feeling the grit grind into my palm. The drawings, which I slid carefully into a towel I'd left on the bench. The booties I held like a heartbeat, their wool soft and perfect, the stitches all even. And then the passport. I wiped water from the picture. My daughter-in-law looked back at me with a name which wasn't hers, a last name I didn't know at all. By the time I made it across the HOA path and into my townhome, my legs prickled with the start of a chill. I draped the album over a cooling rack in the kitchen and set the oven to the lowest heat, like I had done for Michael's duffel bag after he fell into Lake Harriet the summer he was 9. I was careful not to cook the pages. I brewed coffee, dark as November at 5, and wrapped my hands around the mug, staring at the steam as if it could tell me anything. My routine has its own gravity. I wake before daylight, when the neighborhood is a hush broken by snowplows, or, in better months, the early birds. I lay a hand on the living room wall where I keep a calendar and tick off boxes like prayers. Monday is for laundry, Tuesday for bread, Wednesday for cards with the women from St. Timothy's in the church basement, where the coffee is strong and the laughter soft. After Bill passed, I clung to those small anchor points. When Michael brought Jessica to meet me, I set an extra fork at the table, as if she'd been living with us all along. I made tater tot hot dish because it's Minnesota and because I wanted her to taste how I love my family. She smiled, took a photo of the plate, and said, "We'll have to get you a recipe app." I laughed because I thought she was being kind. They bought the townhome down the street from mine, a new build around the loop, modern lines and big windows facing the lake. I helped with the down payment, selling the upright piano that had moved with me from apartment to apartment in those early patchwork years. I told myself I could live without ivory keys under my fingers. What I couldn't live without, I thought, was the sound of my son's voice carrying across the water. On warm nights, you can hear everything that isn't private. After the frost broke last spring, Jessica hosted a brunch on the deck and invited her friends from the city. They brought watercolor salads and boutique seltzers, and she set out a board full of cheeses I couldn't pronounce. I made a platter of deviled eggs and a Jell-O salad that has been at Larson family tables since my Aunt Ruthie clipped the recipe from the Star Tribune in 1968. Jessica kissed my cheek and whispered, "We might be the only ones under 60 who eat this stuff." She said it lightly, but I felt my cheeks heat. Later, I found my deviled eggs untouched, their little paprika freckles bright as shame. These are small things, I told myself. Everyone is finding their way. I remember Jessica at Christmas the first year, in a red sweater that made her look like she was lit from within, laughing with my brother over cards while the snow hushed everything outside. I remember how she leaned toward Michael like he was her center. I remember her hand on mine when I cried quietly in the kitchen because Bill wasn't there to hang the angel on the top of the tree. "Tell me about him," she said, and I did, and she listened like she had all the time in the world. Inside the passport was a stamp I didn't recognize and a folded receipt from a cafe in Duluth, dated 2 weeks ago, written in a handwriting that wasn't Jessica's. Wednesday. Cash only. You'll know me by the hat. My mind skittered like a rabbit. Duluth isn't foreign. It's a drive you take when the leaves turn or when summer begs for water and wind. And yet it is far enough to hold a secret. I set the passport down and opened the cameo locket with careful fingers. Inside, the tiny photo of my mother was blurred from water, but her smile was still there, sunlit on the stoop of our old duplex in Richfield, hair pinned into a bun, smudge of flour on her cheek from the pie she taught me to make. She wore that locket through the lean years when we counted pennies in a Tupperware bowl, and I wore my father's old flannel like a coat. I had been so frightened when it went missing last week that my hands shook as I checked every place it ought to have been. "You're forgetful," Jessica said, not unkindly, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's okay, Margaret. I lose things every day. But I don't lose things. I misplace, yes. I am 66, and the words sometimes hide from me like little boys behind curtains. But I do not lose my mother's face." I laid the booties on a towel and looked at them a long time. A woman my age knows what a thing like that can mean. It can mean joy that catches in your throat. It can mean plans. It can mean hope knotted carefully in yarn. It can also mean sorrow. Not long after Jessica married Michael, she brought me a small wrapped box for Easter early spring when the snow was still dirty in the shade. Inside was a mug that said, "Grandma" in looping script. "We're not telling anyone yet," she said, eyes bright. I had to sit down. We waited the way you do, counting weeks like pennies in a jar, faith growing heavier with each one. When the bleeding came, Jessica did not call me. Michael did, voice thin. "Don't come, Mom," he said. "She doesn't want anyone." I baked a blueberry pie and set it on their porch, the tin warm under a dish towel for when their hunger came back. Nobody ate it. It sat there until the crows discovered it, and the neighborhood kids whispered like my pie was a secret. That was the first time I saw the look in Jessica's eyes that I can't shake now. A kind of remote calm, as if she were standing in a room with the windows open while the rest of us shivered. I have wondered since then if there was a space inside her that grief carved and she never let refill. Or maybe she was always like that, and I had not seen it because I was too busy loving the idea of her. The oven hummed, and the album's pages lifted slightly at the edges like they were remembering how to be themselves. I turned them one by one, laying paper towels between the photographs, my fingers smoothing the images tender as if it hurt them to be touched. There we were at Lake Nokomis, Michael with his hair wet and his smile too big for his face. There we were on the day he got his driver's license, his giddy freedom almost unbearable, and me with my hand on his shoulder to keep from pulling him back inside, just for one more year, just for one more day. There was Bill with a fish he insisted was 14 inches, and me with the tape measure that proved 12. We laughed until we couldn't. Sacrifice is a word that sounds dramatic, but it looks simple when you are inside it. It looks like leaving a college class because your baby has a fever and you do not have anyone to call. It looks like wiping down tables at Perkins after a long shift at St. Luke's because tips pay for soccer cleats. It looks like selling the piano when your son and his wife fall in love with a house they can't quite reach, so you write a check and tell yourself that someday someone will play for you again. It looks like biting your tongue when your daughter-in-law rearranges your kitchen and says, "You'll thank me when you can find the spatula." And the spatula is no longer where your hand looks for it. There have been little signs, missing keepsakes that turned up in odd places. The wedding album gone from the shelf where it had sat since the day we moved in, And when I asked, Jessica said she had borrowed it for a project, an art collage idea, something creative with family history. I nodded, though my heart made a small fist. A bottle of perfume in their guest bathroom, the kind you smell in chain stores where the lights hurt your eyes. Jessica has never worn that scent. A locked drawer in the sideboard, and a quick, bright laugh when I asked, "Oh, we just keep the dog's medicine in there." Though we have not had a dog in this family since Bill's old beagle, Finn, went to sleep in Michael's arms the summer before college. My mother taught me not to snoop, and for 66 years I have obeyed her. That is not because I think snooping is always wrong. It is because I have believed that trust is a better house to live in than suspicion. Walking home with lake water in my shoes, I could feel that house draft under the door. When my phone buzzed, I thought it would be Michael. It was Jessica. The text popped up like a small snowflake on the screen. "I'll handle the suitcase. Please don't tell Michael. He's got that presentation tomorrow." I stared at the little dots that mean someone is typing, waiting for whatever explanation would come next. Something about art, about a mistake, about grief. The dots vanished. Nothing else came. I put the kettle on and made tea, because sometimes bitter is the only taste that grounds you. I sat at the table with my hands around a mug I've had for 30 years, from the St. Paul Winter Carnival. A picture of an ice castle melting from too many trips through the dishwasher. I heard the click of car tires over the speed bump outside, a laugh, the soft thump of Dawn's porch light snapping on automatically. In this neighborhood, we like to pretend nothing terrible happens because our basics are tended. The snow gets plowed, the mail arrives. The HOA sends a newsletter with a cookie recipe and a note about the ducks. But I have lived long enough to know you can bake a pan of bars and still hold a fear like an egg you're scared to crack. The passport sat between my hands, as if it might get up and walk. I considered calling the police. But what would I say? My daughter-in-law threw a suitcase of family memories into the lake, and she has a passport that doesn't match her married name, which could be old, or could be nothing, or could be everything. It felt like those dreams where you try to yell, but your voice is water. I carried the suitcase to the laundry room and wiped it down, the way you wipe a child's face after tears. The lining was torn in one corner. When I pressed my fingers under it, I felt paper. Inside was a folded note, the kind you tuck away because you think it might matter later. There was handwriting I recognized, not from family. From the envelope that came last month with no return address, just resident in a tidy print, and an advertisement for a credit card tucked inside like bait. The note said, "Noon Wednesday, bus station, cash, new start," and a number, 612-555-0190. It was written in black ink, block letters that tried to disguise their own neatness. Someone who wanted to be generic and couldn't. It is strange what your mind does when it is full. It makes lists. Mine did anyway. Wednesday was 2 days away. I had cards at church Wednesday, lunch afterward at the Perkins on 169, where the waitress knows I take my dressing on the side. I could change those plans. I could go to the bus station. I could watch, and like any mother in a parking lot waiting for her child, I could see more than people think I can. I could call the number. I could hand the passport back to Jessica and act like I had not seen it. I could ask her to sit, to take tea, to tell me everything. I could tell Michael. When it comes to my son, I have always had two instincts at war inside me. The first is to protect him. The second is to tell him the truth, no matter what it breaks. When he was too little to understand that Bill's heart had been a ticking thing, I said heart attack like it was a weather event. When he was 13 and came home with his first D on a math test, I did not ground him. I sat next to him and we did each problem together until the sky darkened and the crickets started singing. When he brought home his first girlfriend, I told him I liked her even though I didn't, because I didn't want to be the reason he hid anything. When he brought home Jessica, I liked her. That made everything harder and easier all at once. I remember their wedding at the old Presbyterian church on 3rd, where the pews creak and the light has the yellowed beauty of old photographs. I wore a blue dress because my mother always said blue was my color, even when the cardigan I liked best was mustard, and she wrinkled her nose. I had spent an entire summer of tips on the flowers. Each centerpiece was a small universe of peonies and eucalyptus and the little white star flowers that wilt if you breathe too hard on them. When it was over, Jessica hugged me and whispered, "You didn't have to do all that." I said, "I wanted to." The look on her face then, relief maybe, or the flicker of something else, flicked across my mind now like the light off the lake. The wind tapped an oak branch against the front window. I got up to close the curtains, and when I turned, Jessica was in my doorway. She didn't knock. She looked small with the hallway light behind her, like a shadow out of place. "I'm sorry." Her voice got swallowed by the carpet. "For the scene at the lake." "Come in," I said. I can be stern, but it comes on me only when it must. My mother voice, Michael always called it. I kept that voice folded away for when it mattered. Now I smoothed it like linen. She stepped inside, arms wrapped around herself like a coat. Her nails were still painted that perfect red, chipped now at the edges. She looked at the album propped in my oven. "You always know how to rescue things." "Some things," I said. I handed her a towel, the same blue as a summer sky, and she pressed it between her palms, though they were dry. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "You can't tell Michael," she said, and her voice was sharper. There, the steel again. "He's under enough pressure. That client in Chicago." "This is our family," I said, because I have learned that sometimes you say the simplest sentence and let it stand. I sat and the chair groaned as if it understood the weight of all of it. "You took my mother's locket. You took our album. You took drawings that Michael made when he believed that the sun had to be big enough to fill the page." "I was going to get rid of them," she said, and flinched at her own words. Her hands trembled. She looked up finally. "It's easier when there's no past." "That's not easier," I said. "It's emptier." Silence folded between us. The clock ticked, each second a tiny footfall across a room. I have lived long enough to understand that sometimes people don't tell you the truth because they do not trust you. And sometimes they do not tell you the truth because they do not know it themselves. I thought of the booties. She saw my eyes go to the towel where I had set them. A muscle in her cheek jumped. That's not what you think." "What do I think?" I asked gently. I could see the path my words would take before I said them. I could see the room we would end up in. She swallowed. "Everyone thinks having a baby fixes things." She stared hard at the wall behind me. "It doesn't." She took a breath. "I got the passport before we married, okay? For a trip. I forgot to change it. The money is mine. Michael didn't help me save it. We need—" She stopped. "Please don't ask me for explanations you won't like." "I didn't ask," I said. "I asked you to come in." She blinked as if I doused her with cold water. "You think you're the only one who sacrifices? You think because you sell a piano and make casseroles that you understand?" There was the edge I had felt but not named, the disdain that slides under the door like cold. "You had your life the way you wanted it. You raised him, you did your church ladies, you made your choices. I am making mine." "I made choices that broke me," I said, holding my voice steady. "I gave up school after Bill's second layoff because the rent still comes due no matter what your plans are. I took jobs I never wanted so Michael could have sneakers that didn't come apart at the toe. I sat in cars and listened for breaths from the back seat that told me my baby was still there even when he was 12 and mortified by my worry. I'm not listing these to get a trophy. I'm listing these so you don't speak about my life as if it were delicate." We stared at each other, and in her face I saw a flicker. She had not expected me to push back. She had expected me to fold, to go soft as I always do to keep peace. Peace does not mean pretending not to hear. Peace is sometimes a strong door you close against a storm. She rubbed her forehead with 2 fingers. "I didn't want you to be hurt." "I am hurt," I said simply. "But more than that, I'm frightened." "For what?" "For my son," I said. "And for you. And for what we are to each other." I pointed to the suitcase. "Throwing us into the lake doesn't make those things go away." She let out a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. You talk about us like we're a quilt you can mend. Maybe we are, I said. I've mended a lot of quilts. Some of them needed to be pulled apart first. She looked again at the booties and then away so fast I could feel the pull of it. Keep those, she said abruptly. I can't. She stopped. Just keep them. Jessica, I said, and I used her name like a hand on a shoulder. Who is at the bus station on Wednesday? Her head snapped up. For a second, I saw something true break through. Then the ice covered it. You went through my things. I saved your things from a lake, I said. And something was hidden. You chose the hiding. I took a breath. Will you be there? I asked. At noon? She pressed her lips together, and I could see her considering lies, half-lies, ways to keep me out. She shook her head. Stay out of it. I can't, I said, because staying out of it means abandoning my family on the very day it needs me in it. I'm your family, she said, a challenge. Yes, I said, you are. She stepped back toward the door as if the words burned. Don't tell Michael, she said again, but softer. Not yet. Not yet is not never, I said. I made my voice as gentle as the Minnesota light in May. Give me something to hold, Jessica. My mother always said, you give people something to hold, even if it is only a sentence they can put in their pocket. Tell me one thing that is true. She closed her eyes. I am tired. She opened them. And I am not the villain you make me in your head. I don't make you anything, I said. I am standing knee-deep in cold water trying to lift you and the people I love up out of the dark. That's all. She lifted her chin. You can't fix this with hot dish. I smiled, even though I didn't feel like smiling. Maybe not, but you'll still eat when you're hungry. She left with her coat collar upturned, a small figure swallowed by the night. I stood for a long minute after the door closed, feeling the old house resettle like a woman finding a comfortable spot. I thought of calling Michael, and then I thought of the presentation he had tomorrow, the one he had mentioned over pot roast last Sunday, and the way his eyes had flickered with pride. They're finally trusting me with the big clients, he said. It had taken him years to land a job at Medtronic, and longer to believe he belonged there. Something in me couldn't bear to be the reason he did not sleep. So I did what my mother did when life felt bigger than the kitchen. I cleaned. I wiped the counters so they shone. I laid out a baking sheet and arranged the album pages like leaves in autumn, turning them and turning them. I pressed my palm to the locket and whispered the names of all the people who had worn it. My mother, me, maybe someday someone small who would grab it with a chubby fist. I folded the towel over the booties like blessing. In the morning, I woke to frost limning the edge of the window like lace. I walked the loop around the cul-de-sac and nodded to Don bringing his trash bins in, and to Nora, who always wears her robe to get the paper and waves like she's greeting a crowd. I could feel the tight place in my chest like a knot. At the corner where the school bus stops, I saw two boys tossing a football with hands that felt cold even to look at. The ball bumped the curb and a stray leaf skittered away like a chick. I thought, one day they will be men, and someone will need to tell them something that hurts, and they will think they can run faster than the news. They cannot. I stopped at the church to drop off brownies for the Wednesday card group. Ruth, Pastor Ruth to the congregation, but Ruth to those of us who remember when she taught Sunday school, was in her office. She poured me coffee from a pot so old we joke it should have a retirement party. You look like you've been up all night, she said, and her eyes saw more than my smile. I have decisions to make, I said. She nodded, as if decisions were a parcel you could set down. You will make them, she said, the way you always do. Slow enough to be careful and fast enough to matter. What if I break something on my way? She sat back. Things break, she said. People, less often than you think. Sometimes they bend. On my way home, I passed Lund's and Byerly's and thought about stopping for groceries. I imagined making dinner, something simple that I could take to Michael and Jessica's without calling first, the way I sometimes did with leftovers, standing on the porch with a foil-covered casserole and a note that said, "Eat while it's warm." But last month after I did that, Jessica texted later, "Please don't drop by unannounced." The word please stood at the front like a polite sentry. The rest was offense. I understand boundaries. I do. But there is a way of setting them that feels like care, and a way that feels like a push. I went home and called the number from the note before I could talk myself out of it. A man answered, the line fuzzy the way old radio stations used to be when you were just a hair off the frequency. Hello? Hello, I said. This is... I stopped. What name do you use for yourself when you are a mother-in-law and not a detective? This is Margaret. A beat. Margaret who? Larson, I said. Jessica Larson's mother-in-law. I found a note with this number. Silence. Then a kind of sigh. I think you have the wrong number, he said. But there was an out-of-tune string under the words. A lie that knew it was one. I could have pushed. I didn't. If you meet someone at the bus station on Wednesday, I said, there will be more than one person watching. I hung up before he could answer and sat back in my chair with my heart thudding. I am not a brave woman in the way of soldiers or surgeons, but I am brave in the way of mothers who wait in the dark for headlights to turn into their own driveway. At noon, I would be at the bus station. I decided it the way you decide to take your umbrella and then you are glad that you did when the sky breaks open. I wrote a note to myself on the back of an old envelope. Wednesday. Noon. Be kind. Be brave. I slid the passbook into a plastic bag and tucked it into my purse. I am the woman who brings an extra sweater, who carries Band-Aids and hard candy in her bag, because you never know when someone will need to be patched or sweetened. Now my purse held something that felt like more than identification. It felt like the hinge on a door. That night, Michael called. Ma, he said, using the word he uses when he is tired and doesn't think about being grown. Can I swing by after work? 15 minutes? Of course, I said, and set about to make something that might hand him strength through a plate. I slid a meatloaf into the oven, steamed green beans the way he likes them with butter and salt, and put a loaf of bread in the warmer. He came in with his tie askew and sat, looking at his hands before he looked at me. She's been off, he said softly, which is how men in Minnesota talk about storms. She says she's fine. I think she's not. Have you asked her? I said. He laughed with no humor in it. Every day. Do you love her? I asked, not because I doubted. Because sometimes the asking is a lifeline. He looked at me like I had asked if he loved breathing. Yes, he said, even when she's hard to understand. He rubbed his temples. She says I don't listen. I listen to her more than anyone. I listen so hard I forget what my own voice sounds like. I swallowed. There was a time he would have said those words about me. All children must loosen themselves. The ache of it is a private thing for their mothers. Maybe she's afraid, I said. I did not say of what. He glanced up, and for a second he looked like the boy who showed me his A on a spelling test, disbelief and pride fighting on his face. Of what? He asked, as if I had a list I could hand him. Of how much things change when you want them to stay the same, I said. Of how much the past weighs when you keep carrying it. He nodded slowly. Thanksgiving, he said, shifting in his chair. She wants to go to Chicago. Her friend Jenna. Thanksgiving? I said too quickly. But, I know, he said, eyes apologetic. Our family has a way of making Thanksgiving a quiet holiday, slow and wide. We roast a turkey and argue gently about whether the stuffing should be cooked inside or out. We watch the parade. We call Aunt Karen and listen to her tell us the same story about the time she saw the Rockettes. It is nothing that would impress a television show, but it is ours. Maybe we can do something the weekend before, I said carefully. I could make pies early. He smiled, weary. You always make it good, Ma, he said. He stood, kissed the top of my head like a benediction, and left the meatloaf half-eaten because he was distracted. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt like punctuation. I slept badly. Dreams of dark water and suitcases moving under the surface. Dreams of Jessica, standing at a platform under a clock that wouldn't stop ticking, her sunglasses on though the ceiling was inside. Dreams of myself waving my arms like a woman at a dock trying to warn a boat that the ice is thin. Morning came gray and still. I put on my thickest coat, the purple one with the faux fur collar that Michael teased me about, and drove downtown. The bus station sits off a busy street where pigeons line the roof like notes on a staff. People flowed in and out the way arteries carry life, all in their separate missions. I sat with a paper cup of coffee that tasted like pennies and watched. I was not sure what I expected. A man in a hat, of course. Too many men wore hats. A nervous woman. Too many women looked down. It's funny how, when you are watching for someone else's story, you see snippets of your own. A young mom juggled a baby and a diaper bag with the care of a dancer. A man who could have been my Bill 40 years ago laughed into his phone. A teenager kissed a girl at the corner near the vending machines and walked away backward, unable to just turn. At 11:58, a man sat 2 seats over from me. He wore a hat. That was too vague to be anything. His hands were clean. That was more specific than I wanted it to be. He stared at the door like he had an instruction manual nobody else could cite. I got up slowly, as if I had a leg cramp, and walked the length of the station. I saw a couple who could have been from anywhere hug like glue, and then let go. I saw a woman with a suitcase and a look on her face like she had made the decision to leave long before she stood to do it. I saw an old man reading a newspaper, the actual paper. I saw the round clock hands drag into the 12. Jessica didn't come. Or if she did, she slipped past me in a way I would have to grudgingly admire later. The man in the hat stood, checked his phone, sat. At 12:10, he walked out, stopped by the pillar, scanned the sidewalk, and then left. His shoulders had the set of someone who was going to practice being patient again, in a different place. I sat very still. I called the number from my car. This time, it went to a recording with a voice that said, "Mailbox is full." Back home, I found Jessica sitting on my porch steps. No sunglasses, no lipstick. Her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look younger and more exposed. She stood when she saw me, as if she had rehearsed it. "I didn't go," she said, as if I had asked. She held out her hand, and in it was the other booty, the pair completed by the one I kept inside. I hadn't even realized I'd only had one. I took it carefully. "Thank you," I said, because the habit of gratitude runs deep. I looked at her face. "Jessica," I said, "I need you to tell me what you're doing. Not the ugly version, not the gloss, the true one." She sat down on the steps, the cold ignoring her jeans. "I wanted to start over," she said, "with nothing that tells me what to be, with no album, no drawings, no locket." She glanced at me. And then I realized it isn't a suitcase that keeps you from being yourself. It's the people who look at you and believe they already know you. "Who do you think I believe you are?" I asked. "The woman who makes your son happy or the one who fails him?" she said flatly. "And either one is a costume I can't wear every day." "We are more than what we do for one person," I said. "We are also who we are when we are alone." She took a breath that looked like it hurt. "I'm late," she said. "I thought," I said softly. "How many weeks?" "I don't know," she said. "I haven't wanted to count." We sat in silence until a car drove by, and the driver waved, because in our neighborhood, you wave even if you don't know the story on the stoop. "Tell Michael," I said. "Not because secrets can't be kept, because I have watched what they do when they are kept too long. Tell him today. I will be there. I will be in the room with you, and if you don't want me to say a word, I won't. But I will be there." She looked at me as if I had offered her something she didn't know she needed. "Why?" she asked, and her voice had no steel at all. "Because the worst things I have done in my life were done alone," I said. Wednesday afternoon darkens early here when the clouds are thick. When Jessica left to go home and wait for Michael to come from work, I imagined the light in their living room turn gold, as it always does at 4, the lake catching the dull shine of a sky that threatens snow. I put the album back together as best I could. The paper wrinkled, the ink bled where it insisted. It would never be the same. That, I decided, was all right. We would never be the same either. The point wasn't to get back to before. The point was to go forward without pretending the lake hadn't happened. When the phone rang at 5, it was Michael. "Ma," he said. He didn't say anything else because he couldn't. The sound that came through was made of fear and joy and everything that sits between, and I stood with my hand on the counter and closed my eyes and whispered thanks to a ceiling I have prayed to before. I hung up and wrapped myself in my coat and walked into the cold. Faces across the cul-de-sac were lit by blue television light. Dinner forks rose and fell. A little dog yipped 2 doors down. At the end of the street, Willow Lake lay flat as a held breath. I stood at the dock and watched the last of the day crawl into the night. The place where the suitcase had gone down looked like any other place now. That is the trick the world plays. And the gift, it refuses to keep scars where everyone can see them. The geese cried their urgent cries and lifted, heavy but sure. My feet ached with the memory of cold water. My hands still smelled faintly of damp paper and cheap perfume. There would be a conversation tonight, and more soon that we could not rehearse. There would be a passport to return, a number I might call again or not, a man in a hat who might miss a meeting he told himself was necessary. There would be a baby, or there would not. There would be, either way, the work of remaining a family when it would be easier to say we were not. I thought of my mother's locket, warm in my pocket. I thought of Bill's hands when he taught Michael to ride a bike, not holding on so hard that the boy never learned to balance, not letting go so soon that pain was his first lesson. I thought of Jessica, of the steel that sits in her and the softness that confuses her when it sneaks up. And I thought of my son, with his tie loosened, his eyes bright with a new kind of fear, a better one, the kind that says, I am about to become something I have never been before. A wind picked up from the west, skimming across the lake and drawing shivers out of what leaves remain. I zipped my coat. I have never believed that truth floats by itself. I think it is like the pretty bits of stone you see in the shallow water at Minnehaha Creek. You have to wade in, and you have to be willing to get cold. You have to reach, even when you can't see exactly where, and sometimes your fingers close around what you thought you had lost. Sometimes you come up with nothing but soaked sleeves and the knowledge that you tried. Sometimes you come up with a locket. Sometimes a pair of booties. Sometimes a day you will remember for the rest of your life because it is when the shape of your family began to change. I walked home thinking of warm kitchens and the sound of card games in church basements, of coffee that tastes like comfort, and the way a baby's breath smells like milk and possibility. I thought of how Jessica will look across at me and either lean toward or away. Either way, I will be there. I will be steady. I will be the woman who knows how to rescue what she can and lay the rest out gently to dry. Because this is what I know. The greatest conflicts do not come like storms you can see on the horizon. They come in slippers on a Sunday and in a splash you can hear across a quiet lake. They come in the hand you extend and the hand that doesn't take it. They come in passports and unexpected names. They come in the way you decide to tell the truth, even when it tilts your world. And I am ready for whatever comes next. I would like it to be easy, like a recipe you can follow without thinking. But I trust the hard things more. They make us careful. They make us honest. They make us look at the people we love and say, I'm not here to make you perfect. I'm here to make sure you're not alone. When I look back at that November night overlooking Willow Lake, I realize how every choice made over the years, silently, without rebellion, formed a pile of small concessions, accepted or endured in the warm human hope that homes remain standing when women embrace their sorrows and keep serving coffee. But there comes a moment, and for me, it was the dull thud of the suitcase sinking, when you can no longer pretend everything is where it should be. That suitcase was a milestone, and I, even though tired, knew the next turn had to be mine. That night, I arranged the recovered relics and the sodden fragments on the kitchen table, feeling the house shrink around me. The wood floor groaned with my footsteps. The kettle hummed with the impatience of someone watching a longer time pass. The time of decades, the time of disappointments. My mother's locket, lost and found, hung in my hand, cold and heavy, more than just metal. Within it lay years of resilience and silence, of holding on, of giving in. Everyone said, Margaret, you always solve things. Yes, I did. But how many times had that served to keep other people's pain from having to rise to the surface? And now, faced with this suitcase and what emerged with it, I could no longer sweep the remains under the rug. The injustice came in these details. The disappearance of the wedding album, which Jessica had taken for a project. The delays and disagreements followed by a simple, relax, it's nothing. The delicate but cutting way certain customs of mine were ridiculed, whether it was raspberry jam at Christmas or my fondness for keeping old letters in the tin box hidden in the hallway dresser. It wasn't just the suitcase and the document with another name. It was the sum total of the disagreements, the please don't show up unannounced, the smiles in between, each one tugging at a thread of memory and belonging. Jessica, after all, grew more distant every day, and yet I was never one to point fingers, never to complain. But now, with the remains of our history scattered throughout the house, with my grandson, perhaps grandson, who knows, reduced to a pair of damp woolen shoes along with receipts, hidden money, and another name on a laminated page, the accumulation of these gestures took me back to childhood, to the time when my mother would tell me, "Don't let them take away from you, Margie, what you are. Not to keep a house standing." Now I understand. The locket became my symbol. Not just because it bore her tiny portrait, but because it was what remained of the hard times in Richfield, when mother and daughter shared a quiet strength and a promise to never lose who we are, even in the face of loss. I carried it with me, hanging around my neck as I wrote in my notebook what I needed to do. It was my protection against the feeling of falling apart. It was also a reminder that we can't handle everything. We break once and then again until we finally overflow. So I didn't hesitate. I would go to the bus station, yes, but not just for Jessica. I would do it for myself and for the memory of my family, to face the world I'd ignored for so many years in the name of peace. And if there was a scandal, let it be clean and frank, because the theater of silences had already taken its toll on us. The plan became clear, to protect, but also to heal the wound. I would confront Jessica and whoever else was trying to rewrite our history from the edges, in secret. And I would no longer accept being treated as someone only good for serving. On Wednesday, as the cold crept through the cracks in the house and covered the grass white, I put on my purple coat, my locket tie tied tightly, and headed for the terminal. I walked down the Hudson, saw the city stiffened in the morning, the faces of those who carry on despite the hopelessness. I sat waiting, watching the buses steam up diagonally, trying to imagine which face I was looking for. My heart raced, but with it came a clarity. However humiliating it had been to see my valuables sinking into the mud, Margaret would no longer be the woman of endless concessions. I failed to understand Jessica. In my effort to please, to be the link between generations, I ended up nullifying myself a little every day, swallowing embarrassments, the laughter with her friends, the brunch where they called my dish retro, that request not to show up unannounced as if I were just an inconvenience. So many times, smiling, I felt deflated inside. A door slammed that Jessica didn't notice, a closed drawer in my emotions. I didn't shout. I didn't want to hurt. But today, it was up to me to cross this threshold. At the station, the minutes passed slowly. I saw the man in the hat, the same one from the call, and I recognized the uneasiness in his eyes searching for confirmation in another's face, perhaps an accomplice, perhaps a way out. I was afraid, of course. Behind it came the doubt that had always haunted me. What if I failed? But the lock weighed heavily on my chest. I clutched it, feeling the courage borrowed from all the women who had fought before me. Jessica didn't come, but I stayed. When I returned, I found her sitting on the steps, dejected but with a clean face. She offered the missing shoe as if returning a choice. There, on the steps, she was the one who let her guard down. "I want to start from scratch," she said. "I can't stand being the only one who makes your son happy, nor the one who disappoints him." I listened to her without judging, but I didn't stop myself from saying, "We have a right to exist beyond caring for each other. Staying silent in the face of what they did to our memories is not a virtue. I deserve the truth, My family does too. My moment of enough arrived in the living room, the locket shining in the dirty morning light, and the marks of injustice, small hurts, omissions, exclusion, taking on names and faces. When Jessica admitted she was pregnant, I felt everything mixed together: hope, fear, compassion. I firmed my voice. Enough secrets. Go tell him, and I'll be there. Not even to say anything, just so you don't have to be alone. The turning point then came with pain, but also with a kind of freedom. I realized that sometimes justice is achieved through confrontation, with lies, with polite omissions, with the gray treatment of what needed color. I couldn't protect Michael by avoiding the truth. I couldn't keep my family sheltered in the shadows. That late afternoon, I waited with them when, finally, the truth came out. They talked, they cried, the certainty that much would need to be explained, and that some wounds never heal completely, but that at least they could try to start over with what was real. And if it became necessary to expose it, I would. If everything fell apart in front of neighbors, friends, the church, I would endure it. If Michael was hurt by me, I would face it. There was something greater than pride or reputation at stake: my dignity and the right to honor the memories of those who fought before me. The destroyed suitcase never returned to its original shape, just as we will no longer be the same family we had at the Sunday table. But this imperfection will be a sign that we no longer accept being molded solely by the fear of displeasing. On the surface of Willow Lake, the scars no longer appear, but here inside, each forgotten injustice announces that, from now on, no one will throw away our history without my fight. The locket now rests under my shirt, always close to my heart. It's a shield, a cry, a promise. When I touch it, I reaffirm: there are limits, and there is strength. Love isn't silence in the face of mistakes. It isn't built by erasing who we were. Love and family is being able to face the cold lake and decide to gather up everything they tried to submerge with a steady hand and a clear gaze. I am Margaret Larson, so often invisible, so often underestimated. No longer. If anything else darkens around us, I know I will have the courage to act before everything is lost in the mud of oblivion. It's harder to carry on like this, without ready-made recipes, without hiding what hurts. But for the first time in years, I feel like I belong, not by nullifying myself or settling, but because I've finally chosen to defend my place, my voice, and the truth of those I love, without masks, without concessions. Because this is how, even at 66, a woman finds herself after the storm. Standing, looking forward, with her heart and lock pressed to her chest, ready to let nothing, or anyone, sink alone. On the morning everything changed, there was still a smudge of ice on the garden grass, tiny silver needles that made the world clearer, no room for disguise. I walked slowly down the hallway, slipping into my slippers, feeling each floorboard creak beneath my feet, as if home itself were reminding me, nothing is swept under the rug forever, Margaret. In the kitchen, the smell of coffee was beginning to shimmer, warm and bitter, penetrating deep, soothing to a troubled heart. I touched the locket around my neck, that small, icy locket that, however, seemed to warm when my hand wrapped around it. It was as if my mother were still saying, "Stay strong, Margie. The price of hiding pain is always higher than facing it head on." And it was with this medallion pressed against my skin, pulsing alongside my own fear, that I walked toward Jessica and Michael's house late that afternoon. Golden light streamed through the large windows of their living room, casting a luminous carpet across the floor, where I'd once watched my son play, tossing toy cars back and forth. Now it was a harsh light, a frank clarity, no more shadows, nothing to hide from. Jessica opened the door for me, and I sensed a weariness in her that was different from that night by the lake. Her eyes, always a mystery to me, light blue, but sometimes cloudy, finally allowed me to see something else. Vulnerability, perhaps even a silent prayer that I wouldn't judge her too quickly. I wouldn't. Michael was already there, sitting at the dinner table, his head in his hands, every muscle tense beneath his dress shirt. like a grown boy who's already anticipated bad news, but needs to hear it anyway. And for a while, no one said anything. Silence swirled around us, like an old dog sniffing for wounds. It was Jessica who broke the silence, and I'll never forget her voice, a thin but flawless voice. Not of someone apologizing, but of someone who finally decided not to run away anymore. She pulled the words from her chest, one by one, stitching together difficult truths. The unease of never feeling like she belonged, the fear of not being good enough for her family, the anguish when she got pregnant and felt the crushing weight of expectations, and again later when she realized that no baby will mend what silence tears. She explained the money she'd saved, a secret reserve, not to escape Michael, but to ensure she never felt trapped, as her own mother had felt the day after her father's untimely death. She spoke of the loneliness amid recipes that weren't hers, of the rituals that made her feel like a foreigner. She admitted her mistakes, hiding memories and trying to drown them, literally, by throwing her suitcase into the lake. She asked Michael for forgiveness, not with empty promises, but by offering, for the first time, her naked truth. Michael listened quietly. I sensed in him a mixture of pain, relief, and above all, that stubborn love of someone who refuses to let go of the helm at the first storm. When he spoke, it was without shouting. He said he felt betrayed, yes, and scared, but he also acknowledged that he never really asked Jessica how she was. He just assumed that if he kept smiling, he would fit in effortlessly. He told her, with sad sincerity, "I don't know how to be different either, but I don't want us to remain two strangers who only share a roof." I stood there motionless, the locket heavy as hope on my chest. Only when Jessica reached across the table for my hand did I accept the silent invitation to join in this pact of new beginnings. I held my son's hand too, finally forming a circle that should have been drawn long ago. I felt the tears well up, not just from pain, but from relief, from gratitude, for finally being able to touch the dark bottom of the lake and find there, in the mud, something that deserved to be brought back to the light. We talked for hours, without shortcuts. I talked about my own expectations, how by trying to be invisible or simply pleasant, I ended up sowing resentment. I told her I'd also felt ashamed when my food was ignored at brunch, that I feared being remembered as a stubborn old woman. But above all, I revealed that I'd never wanted anything more than their genuine happiness. I admitted my limits. I admitted that sometimes my kindness was a fear of seeing my family change and losing my place in the world. When we concluded that conversation, with all the secrets and omissions laid out on the table, each face bore the mark of suffering, but also a new glow, that of someone who, despite everything, had not given in to cynicism. I told them that there would always be room around my table, and that memories, however waterlogged or distorted, belong to us all. They are the most authentic thing we have. From now on, I said, no one hides anything for fear of breaking the peace. If peace depends on pretense, it was never true. That night, I went home alone, but with my heart less lonely. I stopped at the hallway closet, opened the tin where I keep old letters, and pulled out the first supermarket receipt, yellow from so much age, a legacy from my mother, who said that strong women always have some spare change saved so they don't depend on anyone. I lay in bed with the padlock still on my chest, a warmth invading the November chill. I thought of all the conversations we would still have, the visits that would come and go, the marks of pain that wouldn't disappear, but also the unexpected joys that, even exhausted, still know how to make a home. The following days were spent making small repairs, drying the album page by page, gluing the crumpled photos, mending the woolen slippers, chatting with Michael and Jessica in cafes, and walking together along the shore of Willow Lake. Sometimes the conversation was just silence, but it was no longer the silence of fear, but rather the silence of rebuilding. Jessica occasionally laughed nervously and then allowed herself to share her insecurities, like someone finding shelter where before there was only distance. Michael, more composed, learned to listen without rushing, to ask questions without demanding easy answers. At church every Wednesday, the card ladies noticed a new glow in me. Ruth, ever shrewd, simply remarked, "When the truth hurts, it's a sign it's been stifled for too long." I smiled, knowing that from now on, I would be more cautious. If a new challenge arose, I would face it, for I was no longer the Margaret of silent concessions. Finally, the day came when Jessica came to me, her eyes shining with tears, but her face open. She brought the pair of dry shoes, wrapped in an embroidered cloth. If I have a daughter, Margaret, I would like her to have a symbol of herself too. And may no one ever hide from her who she is. I hugged her like someone taming a storm, gentle but firm, my chest pressed to hers, the locket between us. I felt finally that family can be mended, even in pieces, as long as everyone is willing to show their seams. On the last Sunday before Christmas, I invited Jessica and Michael over for dinner. No formalities, just the three of us, simple dishes, mashed potatoes, roast beef, the old Jell-O salad everyone had now learned to respect and even eat. As the snow fell outside and the house was warm, Michael said softly, "Ma, thank you for not giving up on us when it was easier to keep quiet." And Jessica added, almost whispering, "Thank you for not leaving me alone." I was speechless. I just tightened the lock around my neck, feeling this time not the weight of loss, but the sweetness of possibility. Life, I've learned, never goes back to the way it was before the great storms, and it shouldn't. The secret is to cross the lake, even if it's freezing, knowing that courage is made of small gestures, facing a thrown suitcase, taking back what's ours, claiming the right to hurt, to speak, to say no. It's looking at the locket, still stained from the lake, and understanding that it never needed to be perfect to carry the whole story of who we are: family, mistakes, forgiveness, and resilient love. If you've ever felt a door close to your story, if you've ever seen your memories sink into the dark waters of oblivion, know that there's always someone willing to step into the water for you. And if one day you lack courage, remember the locket. Even surrounded by silence, it will always find a chest to knock on. It's because of all this that today, when I sit before Willow Lake, I no longer fear the cold or the buried stories. I know that nothing truly disappears as long as someone is willing to search, to rescue, to tell it again. Family reinvents itself with each afternoon someone chooses to stay, with each forgiveness granted, with each truth spoken with respect. So, let my story resonate as an invitation. If you ever needed to fight for your place, don't give up your voice, nor your defense of those you love. Pick up what was sunk, clean, dry, rebuild, however shakily, your part in the mosaic of life. Because it's not just about surviving the abysses, it's about becoming a beacon on the dock, ensuring that no one, absolutely no one, needs to sink alone. If this memory touched you, tell me in the comments, your stories, your new beginnings. Like, share, and subscribe so we can continue weaving memories and courage together. There will always be room for one more chair at the table, and for one more locket cleaned by the power of love.